I don't know how it happened. 1 minute, I was just trying to check the weather on Sarah's phone. Mine had died, and the next minute, I was staring at an email that flipped my whole world upside down. It wasn't the kind of email you expect to find when you're not looking for anything. At first, it just looked like some normal message. But there was this one line that caught my eye. I can't wait to see you tonight. It's been too long. Something in the pit of my stomach twisted, but I brushed it off. Maybe it was just a flirtatious email between her and a friend, right? I mean, I trusted her. She'd never given me a reason not to. But then I saw the name at the bottom of the email. Dave. My heart skipped a beat. Dave. My best friend. My brother. I never thought I'd see his name in an email like that. He was practically family. I knew Sarah and Dave were close, but close like friends, right? Just like I was close to his wife, Emily. We all hung out, had BBQs, watched football games together. That's how it's supposed to be. That's how it was. But this was something else. I felt a cold sweat start to break out. I didn't even know how to react. My fingers froze over the phone. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to think about it. But I knew what it meant. I started reading more, every word feeling like it was twisting a knife deeper. There was more, all these little messages that seemed innocent at first, but reading them all together, it was obvious. They'd been sleeping together. 4 months. The betrayal was right there in front of me. I should have put the phone down. Walked away. But I couldn't. I kept scrolling, reading more, feeling the anger rise in my chest. I could see it all so clearly now. The late nights Sarah had been working late or going out with the girls. She hadn't been working late at all. She'd been with him. The worst part. I'd been blind to it. I trusted both of them. I'd never even suspected something like this. At first, I thought about letting it go. Not confronting her, just burying it and pretending I didn't know. But I couldn't. I felt sick. I had to know the truth. So, I did the one thing I never thought I'd have to do. I went into full detective mode. I wasn't just going to confront Sarah. I needed proof. Solid proof. So I started going through her phone like I was looking for a needle in a haystack. Every text, every phone call. It felt wrong, but I was desperate. I had to know what I was dealing with. The more I dug, the more I found. Messages, calls, pictures. It was all there. I could feel the rage bubbling up, but I tried to keep calm. If I confronted her without all the evidence, she'd just deny it. I knew her well enough to know she'd lie her way out of anything. And the more I found, the more I realized I didn't just need the truth for me. I needed it for everyone else around us too. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about making sure everyone knew who she really was, and what Dave had done to me. I couldn't wait. I couldn't sit with this anymore. I had to confront her. Tonight. That night, I don't think I slept a wink. My mind was racing. My hands were shaking as I tried to prepare myself for what I was about to do. Confronting Sarah. It wasn't something I ever imagined happening. We'd been married for years, built a life together. But the more I thought about everything I'd found, the more I realized this was the only thing left to do. The house felt different. Like the walls were closing in on me, like everything was suffocating. I couldn't even look at Sarah without my blood boiling. She was walking around the house, acting like everything was fine, like nothing had changed. I'd seen that smile before, that warm, familiar look she gave me when we were on the same page, but now it felt fake. Hollow. She asked me what was wrong, if I was okay. I didn't answer. I couldn't. How do you answer that when your whole world has been flipped upside down? How do you explain to the person you thought you knew more than anyone in the world that you just uncovered something that rips apart everything? I couldn't even form the words. But it didn't matter. I couldn't keep pretending that nothing had changed. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. So, I waited. I just stood there, staring at her, letting the silence stretch on. I could see her getting uncomfortable, shifting her weight from foot to foot, her eyes darting to the door like she was trying to figure out if she should run. But I wasn't going to make this easy for her. Not anymore. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. The tension in the room was thick, unbearable. I pulled out my phone and handed it to her. The weight of that device felt heavier than anything in that moment, like it carried the truth of everything we'd built, everything we'd shared. I told her to look at it. I didn't even need to say anything more. The evidence was there, right in front of her. Texts, emails, pictures, dates, times. It was all laid out for her to see. All the lies. All the deceit. The affair. At first, she just stared at the screen. Her face went pale. Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find words, but nothing came out. For a moment, I almost thought she might tell me the truth right there. But no, she didn't. Instead, she started with the usual denial. She said I was wrong, that I was seeing things. She even tried to blame me, telling me that maybe I wasn't there for her enough, that I didn't pay attention to her needs. The excuses, the justifications, they came out like a flood. It was almost like she had been rehearsing it all along. I couldn't believe it. Here we were, at the point where she was caught red-handed, and she still tried to turn it around on me. It was like I wasn't supposed to feel anything. She was angry now, defensive, talking over me as if I was the one who had done something wrong. She kept telling me that we had grown apart, that things hadn't been the same between us for a while. She'd tried to talk to me, but I wasn't listening. She didn't feel wanted, she didn't feel appreciated. It was all so rehearsed, so practiced, like it was the script she had been writing in her head to explain away everything she had done. But what hurt the most wasn't the excuses. It wasn't the way she tried to paint herself as the victim. No, what hurt the most was the way she said his name. Dave. She spoke it like it was normal, like he was just some guy she had slept with, and that it was just a mistake. The way she said his name made my blood run cold. She didn't seem to care about the fact that he was someone I had trusted. She didn't seem to understand how deep the betrayal went, not just between us, but between her and everyone else who thought they knew her. And then, just when I thought I couldn't feel any more disgusted, she started crying. Real tears, real sobs. She told me she was sorry. She begged me to understand. She said she didn't know what had happened, that she had been lonely and confused, and that this affair with Dave had just happened. She even tried to make it seem like I should feel sorry for her, like I should be understanding. I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought I'd get some kind of apology, some kind of remorse. But no, it was just more of the same. She was sorry because she got caught. Not because of what she'd done. Not because of the way she'd betrayed me. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't sorry for me. She was sorry for herself. And in that moment, everything in me snapped. All the anger, all the hurt, it bubbled up to the surface. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not this time. Not after everything we'd built together. I wanted her to feel what I was feeling. I wanted her to understand the weight of what she had done. But more than that, I wanted her to know that I wasn't going to let her destroy me. I wasn't going to let her get away with shattering everything for some fleeting satisfaction. I don't know how long I stood there, watching her cry. But when I finally spoke, it wasn't to comfort her. It wasn't to try to fix things. It was to make it clear that this was over. No more lies. No more excuses. What had happened, and nothing would ever make it right again. The silence that followed her tears was deafening. Sarah just stood there, eyes red from crying, looking like she was waiting for me to say something. Anything that would make it all go away. But I wasn't going to give her that. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. Not anymore. I remember feeling this strange kind of calm, almost like I was outside myself, watching everything unfold from a distance. It wasn't anger that controlled me anymore. It was something colder. Something more calculated. I had what I needed. Proof. The truth. And it was going to burn everything to the ground. She kept trying to speak, kept telling me she wanted to fix things, that we could go to therapy, that she loved me, but it was all just noise. The more she said, the more I felt this deep, sickening anger rising in me. How could she stand there and act like we could fix anything? Like I was the one who had broken things? It was like a part of her couldn't even see how deeply she'd hurt me. It wasn't just about an affair. It was about the lies. The years of pretending, of living a life that wasn't real. I'd been a fool. I didn't know how to tell her that. Instead, I turned and walked out of the room. I couldn't stand being in that house with her anymore. Not with the memories of all the times I'd trusted her, all the times I believed in us. It felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in with every second I stayed there. I needed to breathe. I left the house, but I didn't know where to go. It was a Saturday, and the kids were out with my parents, so at least I didn't have to worry about them. But that didn't stop the feeling of everything unraveling. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight, knuckles white, as I drove aimlessly, not really caring where I ended up. I just needed to be somewhere else. I called a few people, friends, people I trusted, but nobody picked up. I didn't want to talk to them, not yet. The last thing I wanted was for anyone to feel sorry for me. I didn't need sympathy. I needed answers. I needed to know why. But most of all, I needed to get control of the situation. I wasn't going to let Sarah or Dave think they could get away with this. Eventually, I ended up at the one place that felt familiar, the one place where I could think straight. I pulled up to Dave's apartment, staring at the door like it was a ticking time bomb. I don't even remember getting out of the car, but before I knew it, I was standing in front of it, pounding on the door with everything I had. I wasn't sure what I was going to say to him. Hell, I wasn't even sure what I was going to do when he opened the door. But I was done being weak. I wasn't going to let him slip away unscathed. He opened it slowly, probably expecting to see me at some point, but not like this. I didn't give him a chance to say anything before I stepped inside. I don't know if he could see it in my eyes, but he could feel the tension in the air. He knew. I didn't want to hear his excuses. I didn't want to hear anything about how it just happened, or how Sarah needed someone. I didn't want to hear any of it. All I could see was the man I had trusted, the one I had called my best friend, the one I'd let into my life and my home. And in that moment, all I saw was betrayal. I told him straight up what I knew, everything I had uncovered, without sugarcoating a single thing. His face dropped, but he didn't deny it. He didn't try to make it sound better or defend himself. Instead, he just looked like a guy who'd been caught, like he didn't know what to say. And then he did the worst thing he could have done. He apologized. Not to me, but to himself. He said he was sorry that it had gotten this far, sorry that he'd messed up. But he didn't seem sorry about the damage he'd done to me, to my marriage, to my family. He was sorry he got caught. That was it. I stood there, listening to him, and I could feel every inch of my body wanting to explode. But I kept my cool. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me lose it. I wasn't going to give him that power. I let him speak, let him ramble on about how things had gotten complicated, how it had been an emotional connection with Sarah, and how they'd never meant for it to go this far. But that didn't matter. Not anymore. I was past the point of caring about their excuses. I knew the truth now. I knew what kind of people they were. And no amount of apologies was going to fix it. I didn't stay much longer after that. There was nothing else to say. I left his apartment feeling more disgusted than I ever had in my life. But I wasn't angry. I was resolved. I had everything I needed. And now, it was time to make sure they both knew that there would be consequences for what they'd done. As I drove back home, I couldn't help but think about how everything had changed in the span of a few hours. I wasn't sure what would happen with Sarah or the marriage, but one thing was clear, I wasn't going to let this go. The moment I walked back into that house, everything was going to be different. I wasn't sure what I expected when I walked back into the house. I'd been gone for a few hours, but in a way, it felt like I'd been gone for days. I could still hear her voice, that fake, pleading tone she'd used before, echoing in my mind. I could still feel the weight of her lies pressing down on me. When I stepped through the door, Sarah was standing in the kitchen, wiping her eyes with a tissue, like she'd been crying the whole time I was gone. She looked up at me, and for a second, there was this flicker of hope in her eyes, as if she thought I might come around, that I might forgive her. But there was no forgiveness coming. Not tonight. Not ever. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't need to. She knew. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. I could see the way her hands trembled, the way she took a step back like she was bracing herself for what was coming next. The silence stretched on, and I let it. I wanted her to feel the weight of it. I wanted her to feel what I felt, to sit in the discomfort, to know that her world was crumbling around her, and she had no one to blame but herself. I didn't even look at her when I walked past her, didn't even acknowledge her presence as I went straight to the living room, grabbing the laptop from the coffee table. I had already gone through everything once, but now I needed to make sure she understood. I needed to show her just how deep the betrayal ran. I opened the laptop and started pulling up everything. Every email, every text message, every phone call. I had it all. The evidence. The proof that she had destroyed everything between us. I didn't want to just tell her. I wanted her to see it for herself, to watch as her lies were laid bare, one after another. She came into the room, her voice shaky, asking me what I was doing. I didn't answer her. I just kept scrolling through the files, pulling up the conversations, the photos, the dates. I could hear her breathing behind me, soft at first, then growing louder as the reality of what she was seeing began to sink in. I wasn't even looking at her anymore. I didn't have to. I could feel her eyes on me, could feel the weight of her guilt pressing down on me. But I wasn't going to let it go. Not this time. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she broke the silence. She started talking again, her words spilling out in a desperate rush, trying to explain herself, trying to make excuses. She said she was confused, that she didn't know how it happened, that she never meant for it to go this far. But it was too late for excuses. I wasn't interested in hearing her guilt-ridden explanations anymore. I had seen enough, and I was done. It wasn't just the affair itself that hurt the most. It was the way she had lied to me. How she had kept it all hidden for so long, pretending everything was fine when all along, she had been living this secret life with Dave. How she had looked me in the eyes every day, kissed me, told me she loved me, all while betraying me in the worst possible way. How could she live with herself knowing what she'd done? How could she look at me like she was the victim in all of this? As much as I wanted to scream at her, to throw all those emotions back at her in a violent outburst, I stayed calm. Calm because I knew that this, the destruction of her image, the shattering of the life she'd built off lies, would hurt her more than anything I could say. I wasn't going to let her off easy. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of pretending like everything could be fixed. I didn't need to yell or throw things. I just needed to make sure she understood that I was done. She kept trying to apologize, saying she was sorry, begging me to understand, that she'd make things right. But I didn't want her apologies. They were hollow. I didn't care if she was sorry. I cared about the fact that she'd destroyed something I'd invested everything in. She was already too far gone. So, I turned away from her, putting the laptop down and walking out of the room. I could hear her call out to me, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. That night, I didn't sleep. Not a wink. How could I? The images, the messages, the constant loop of betrayal, those things were burned into my mind. But there was something else too, something I hadn't expected. A feeling of power, of control. Like I was no longer the helpless husband, the victim in all this. I had taken back some control by uncovering the truth, by exposing her. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt like I was finally calling the shots. But at the same time, I felt this gnawing emptiness. It wasn't just about punishing her or even getting revenge. It was about the fact that this was my life, my marriage, and it was all a lie. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I could get back at her all I wanted, but it wasn't going to fix the damage. It wasn't going to fix what we had, or what I thought we had. And then there was Dave. I hadn't even begun to think about how I was going to deal with him yet. He was still out there, still part of this mess. I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. But for now, I had Sarah's world in pieces. I had her where she belonged, on her knees, begging for forgiveness that wasn't coming. And as much as it hurt to admit, I couldn't stop the small part of me that felt a bitter satisfaction in that. The days that followed were a blur. I didn't know how to navigate the house, how to look at Sarah without feeling like a stranger was standing in front of me. Every word she said, every gesture, felt like a lie. I could see the guilt in her eyes, but it didn't change anything. She tried to act normal, like we could just pick up where we left off, but I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. Sarah kept asking me what I needed, how she could fix things. She wanted to go to therapy. She wanted to talk about what went wrong in our marriage. But I wasn't interested. I wasn't ready to forgive her, and I didn't know if I ever would be. The more she pleaded, the more distant I became. The more she begged for another chance, the colder I felt. It wasn't even about saving the marriage anymore. It was about holding her accountable, about making her feel the weight of what she'd done. I didn't speak to Dave for a few days. I knew he'd be trying to find some way to apologize, to explain himself, to talk his way out of it. But I didn't want to hear any of it. There was nothing he could say to me that would change the fact that he'd crossed a line that was never meant to be crossed. He knew better. He knew what kind of friendship we had, what kind of trust one had placed in him. And he had betrayed that, betrayed me, in the worst possible way. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the years of lies. All the times I had defended him, trusted him, invited him into my home, and thought of him as family. He was supposed to be the guy I could count on, the one who had my back. Instead, he had been sleeping with my wife. My best friend. That was something I couldn't erase from my mind, no matter how hard I tried. But despite my anger, despite the betrayal, I couldn't help but feel this heavy, gnawing emptiness in the pit of my stomach. There were moments when I would find myself sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, and it would hit me all over again, the weight of what had happened. I didn't know how to feel anymore. I didn't know who I was, who we were, what was left. The life I thought we had built, the love I thought we shared, felt like it had all been a lie. And there were moments when I just wanted to forget it all, to pretend like none of it had happened. But I couldn't. I couldn't unsee what I knew. That's when I decided it was time to take the next step. No more waiting, no more pretending like I didn't care. I had to act, and I had to act fast. If I was going to get some kind of closure, some sense of justice, it wasn't going to come from Sarah's half-hearted apologies. It wasn't going to come from her trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. It was going to come from making sure everyone around us knew the truth. The first thing I did was start talking to some of our mutual friends. The ones who had always been just friends with Sarah. The ones who didn't know what was really going on behind closed doors. The ones who had probably suspected something but never said anything. I called Mike, one of the guys we had hung out with on a regular basis. He was always the no-drama guy, the one who stayed out of other people's business. But now I needed him to know. I needed to make sure he understood that this wasn't just some bad mistake. It was a betrayal of the highest order. I told him everything. I didn't hold anything back. The affair, the texts, the emails, the lies. Everything. I didn't care if he judged me, if he thought I was overreacting. I wasn't going to be the one left in the dark anymore. I wasn't going to let Sarah and Dave get away with this behind my back. Mike was quiet on the other end of the phone, and I could hear the disbelief in his voice when I finally got to the part about Dave. He didn't say much. What could he say? But I could tell from the pause that he was shocked. Maybe even a little guilty for not noticing the signs. He promised me he'd keep it between us, but I knew that wasn't going to last. Word spreads. And when it did, I wanted Sarah and Dave to feel the ripple effects of their actions. I wasn't going to be the only one left holding this secret. After Mike, I reached out to a few other people. People who were close to both of us, people who had trusted Dave, trusted Sarah. It felt like a strange mix of relief and anger, telling people what had happened. Part of me wanted to scream it from the rooftops, wanted everyone to know how badly I'd been betrayed. The other part of me felt like I was stepping into dangerous territory. It was one thing to confront Sarah and Dave, but dragging other people into it? That felt messy. But I wasn't in the mood to be nice anymore. I wasn't going to protect anyone who had known about this and kept quiet. The worst part, though, was coming home after each conversation. After telling someone else the truth, I would come back to that empty house, that house that no longer felt like home. Sarah was always there, her eyes pleading, her voice trying to reassure me that she was sorry, that she was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. But I didn't want her apologies. I didn't want her to tell me she was trying. The damage had already been done. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the person I had to fix wasn't Sarah. It was me. Because right now, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what to do next. I was stuck in this limbo between wanting revenge and wanting to move on, between wanting to tear everything apart and just walking away. But one thing was for sure. Sarah wasn't going to get away with this. And Dave, he was next. The thing about betrayal is, it doesn't stay contained. It doesn't stay within the walls of your home, no matter how much you want it to. It spills out. It infects everything it touches. And that's exactly what happened. Once I told a few people, it was like the floodgates opened. Word spread. It wasn't long before some of our friends started to distance themselves from Sarah. The people who had once praised her, trusted her, shared good times with her. Suddenly, they were keeping their distance. I could feel the shift. Not that they said anything outright, but it was there. The subtle looks, the conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. Everyone could feel the tension. And for once, it felt good. It felt like I wasn't the only one in the dark anymore. Sarah didn't know how to handle it. She would call me, begging me to fix things, saying that everyone was talking, that people were treating her differently. But in my mind, that was the least of her worries. I was done worrying about her image. Done protecting her. This was about me. About me not being the fool anymore. I'd say I wanted the truth to be out there, but in reality, it was a bitter thing to deal with. I didn't want to be the guy whose wife had an affair with his best friend. That wasn't how I pictured my life. But I also wasn't going to pretend everything was okay. Not anymore. One afternoon, a few days after I had started telling people, Sarah came to me, desperate, asking if we could go to couples therapy. I could tell she was grasping at straws, trying to hold on to the last bit of control. But I was done with therapy. I'd sat through the sessions before, worked through all the communication issues and emotional distance we supposedly had. But that wasn't the problem. The problem wasn't communication. It was the fact that she had betrayed me in the most basic, unforgivable way. Therapy wasn't going to fix that. So, I told her no. I told her there was no we anymore. And I watched her face as the words sank in. For a second, there was this flicker of hope in her eyes, but when she realized I meant it, when she saw that I was done, that I wasn't just angry, but coldly resolute, it all fell apart. Her shoulders slumped. Her eyes welled up with tears, but she didn't say anything. What could she say? There was nothing left. I had to go out of the house for a bit. I couldn't stand being in that suffocating space with her anymore. I grabbed my jacket and headed out, telling her I'd be back later. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I didn't care. I just needed to be away from her. Away from everything. I drove for hours. It felt like driving was the only thing that made sense anymore. The road stretching out before me felt like the only thing that hadn't betrayed me. That night, when I came home, I didn't expect Sarah to be there. But she was. She was sitting in the living room, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She was trying to look strong, but I could see through it. She wasn't as composed as she was pretending to be. And it made me sick to my stomach. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me, waiting for some kind of reaction. She must have been hoping that maybe I'd soften, that maybe I'd change my mind. But I wasn't about to do that. I wasn't going to give her any false hope. So, I turned and walked right past her, heading into the kitchen. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. I wasn't going to let her think she could win me back with more tears, more lies. But as I opened the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water, something in me snapped. I turned to her, watching her sit there like she was already defeated, like she was trying to accept what she knew was coming. And for a moment, I felt this strange sense of satisfaction. Not the kind that comes from revenge, but the kind that comes from realizing that you're finally in control of your life again. That you're no longer going to let someone else dictate your happiness. I said it quietly, but with every ounce of strength I had left. You don't get to do this to me anymore. You don't get to control my life, my decisions, my happiness. It's over. She didn't respond. Not right away. But I could tell she had heard me. Her eyes dropped to the floor, and for a split second, I thought she might say something. Apologize, beg me to reconsider. But she didn't. She just sat there. And for the first time in days, there was silence. Real silence. The kind where neither of us was pretending anymore. She knew what I had already figured out. There was no going back. The worst part. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel vengeful. I just felt empty. Like I'd already given up on us before she had. And that scared me. Because if I was already that far gone, how was I ever supposed to go back to who I was before? The next morning, she was gone. Not physically, but emotionally. She had packed up some of her things, the essentials, and left a note. It was short, apologetic, but it didn't matter. She wasn't asking for forgiveness anymore. She was just gone. It felt surreal, like I was floating through a dream. I hadn't expected her to leave so soon. I thought she'd fight it longer, that she'd try to manipulate the situation, but she didn't. And part of me was relieved. She was gone, and I didn't have to pretend that we were working things out anymore. But there was still the matter of Dave. I knew I couldn't let him off the hook just because Sarah had packed her bags. He was still out there. He was still part of this. And it wasn't over. Not until he understood exactly what his betrayal had cost me. It's funny how quickly everything can change. One moment, you're sitting in your home, trying to salvage a life, and the next, you're staring at a mirror, thinking, who am I now? I'd been through days of agony, weeks of anger, and now, as Sarah's absence filled the space, a different kind of numbness started settling in. It was like I'd been living in a fog, but now I was starting to clear the air. Sarah was gone. The affair was exposed. The lies had come crashing down. But there was still Dave. And he wasn't going to just slink away into the shadows. I couldn't let him off easy. I couldn't pretend like it didn't matter anymore. I couldn't just walk away from this without confronting him. I needed him to understand the depth of what he'd done. And not just for my sake, for everyone else's too. He needed to know that there were consequences for this kind of betrayal. It had been a week since the last time I'd seen him, since I'd gone to his apartment, standing there like some ghost, watching him try to explain himself. But I hadn't let it go. I wasn't done. The fury I felt when I walked out of his apartment was still there, simmering under the surface, and now it was time to make him feel it. No more avoiding it. No more just talking about it. It was time for a reckoning. I didn't give him a heads up this time. I didn't text him or call him to say we needed to meet. I just showed up. The door was locked when I knocked, but I didn't care. I kept pounding, louder this time, until I heard the footsteps inside. He opened the door slowly, a nervous look in his eyes. His hair was messy, like he'd been napping, but I didn't care about that either. What I cared about was the guy standing in front of me, the guy who had shattered everything in my life, and I wasn't about to let him act like this was no big deal. When he saw me standing there, I could tell he was rattled. He wasn't prepared for this. I wasn't playing games anymore. No polite small talk. No casual greetings. I was done pretending. He tried to say something, but I cut him off. I didn't want to hear his excuses again. I didn't want to hear how sorry he was. I didn't want to hear anything that wasn't about him taking responsibility. I stepped inside his apartment without asking, walking past him like I owned the place. He didn't try to stop me, though he did ask what the hell I was doing there. I told him I wasn't here to talk. I was here to make him understand what he had done, not just to me, but to everything we'd all built. Dave stood there, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to find the right words. But there were no right words. Not anymore. He knew that. I could see it in his face. I wasn't some guy he could brush off. I wasn't going to let him talk his way out of it like he had last time. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he'd done. I wanted him to understand that I wasn't just angry. I was hurt, betrayed, shattered. I didn't even know what I was going to do next, but I knew I wasn't leaving until he felt it. Until he understood that what he had done wasn't something he could apologize for, something he could just explain away. This was beyond that. This was something that would change our friendship forever. I didn't even know if we could go back to being friends, or if I even wanted that anymore. I wasn't sure where to go from here, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let him walk away without knowing how deep this cut. I told him everything. I told him how it felt to be betrayed by the one person I thought I could trust, to have the man I called my best friend not only sleep with my wife but hide it behind my back for months. I told him how it felt to realize that the friendship we had was a lie. How I had invested years of my life into believing we were brothers, only to have him turn on me like this. I didn't hold back. I let every ounce of my frustration, anger, and pain spill out in front of him. And you know what? He didn't try to defend himself. Not this time. He just stood there, looking defeated. I could see the guilt in his eyes, but it wasn't enough. His remorse wasn't enough to fix what he had broken. Nothing could fix that. Eventually, he muttered something about how he was sorry, how he didn't want things to get this bad. He said he regretted it. But again, it wasn't the apology I was looking for. I wasn't asking for his regrets. I was asking him to understand what he had done to me, to us. His apology wasn't going to bring back what we had. It wasn't going to fix the trust he had destroyed. The more he spoke, the more I realized there was nothing left to say. Nothing left to fix. I'd already made up my mind. This wasn't about forgiveness anymore. This was about closure. The friendship was over. The marriage was over. And nothing was going to change that. I told him that. I told him there was no going back. That what we had was done. And that we'd never be the same again. It wasn't a threat, it was just the truth. A truth that he finally seemed to understand. The look on his face shifted from guilt to resignation. It was clear now. He knew this wasn't something that could be patched up. This wasn't some dumb mistake he could sweep under the rug. This was real. And it was over. I didn't give him a chance to say more. I turned around and walked out of his apartment. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't try to beg me to reconsider. I wasn't sure if he was relieved or just defeated, but I didn't care. I wasn't looking for anything from him anymore. As I drove away, I felt that same mixture of emptiness and strange satisfaction that had been haunting me since everything fell apart. I had done what I needed to do. I had confronted him. I had made him feel the consequences of his actions. And as the car sped down the street, I realized that, despite everything, I wasn't sure if I would ever feel truly free of this. But at least I wasn't a fool anymore. At least I knew the truth. The weeks that followed were quieter. The kind of quiet that felt heavy, like when everything you knew has been shattered and you're left standing in the ruins, wondering what to do with the pieces. I'd confronted Sarah. I'd confronted Dave. The truth had come out, and the anger, the rawness of it all, had started to fade into something colder. The betrayal wasn't new anymore, but it was still there. Always lurking, just beneath the surface. I'd spent the first few days after confronting Dave wondering if I'd done the right thing. I had ripped apart a friendship, a marriage, everything I had built with these two people, and for what? For revenge? For closure? I wasn't sure anymore. I wasn't sure what I had hoped to feel after that confrontation. Satisfaction. Freedom. Maybe a little of both. But the reality was, the mess was still there. The guilt, the confusion, the endless loop of wondering if I could have done things differently. The truth was, there was no going back. The worst part of all of this was the feeling of being alone. I'd lost Sarah. I'd lost Dave. And as time went on, it felt like I was losing parts of myself too. I wasn't the same guy who walked into that marriage all those years ago, the guy who believed in love, in loyalty. That guy was gone. The man standing in front of the mirror now, staring back at me with hollow eyes, was a stranger. A man who had been betrayed. A man who couldn't trust anyone, not even himself. And then there were the whispers. The people in our circle, friends, acquaintances, co-workers, who had gotten wind of what had happened. I didn't know who had told them. Maybe it was Mike. Maybe it was Emily, Dave's wife, who knew about the affair long before I did. It didn't matter. What mattered was that everyone knew. I wasn't just the guy whose wife had cheated on him. I was the guy whose best friend had done it. The weight of that level of humiliation, was something I hadn't been prepared for. I wasn't ashamed of what had happened, but I was ashamed of how everyone saw me now. People would look at me sideways, some with sympathy, others with that weird, awkward smile, like they didn't know what to say. It was uncomfortable, but it was something I had to live with. I had no choice but to face it. I kept to myself mostly. I didn't go out much. I didn't go to the gym, didn't meet up with friends. Hell, I didn't even spend time with the kids as much as I should have. I was just numb. I would put on a good face when they came over for visits, try to make things seem normal for them, but inside I felt like I was falling apart. I wasn't sure how to rebuild my life when the foundation had been ripped from under me. How do you start over when the person you trusted most in this world, the person who was supposed to have your back, has stabbed you in the heart? Sarah and I didn't talk much after she left. Every now and then, she would text me, asking about the kids, about things around the house. She'd send me these long, apologetic messages, begging me to forgive her, to give her another chance. I didn't respond. I couldn't. What was there left to say? Every word out of her mouth felt like another attempt to manipulate me into feeling sorry for her, into thinking that we could somehow go back to what we once had. But the truth was, I was done. I was never going to forget what she had done. She had broken me, and nothing she said or did would ever undo that. Eventually, I stopped responding to her texts altogether. I didn't want her to have any power over me anymore. I had to protect myself. So, I focused on the kids. They were the only thing that made any sense. They were the only part of my life that still felt real, still felt worth fighting for. I spent more time with them, took them places, tried to make their days a little brighter while the world around me felt like it was crumbling. It was about 2 months after everything had fallen apart that I ran into Dave again. I had been avoiding him, of course. I wasn't going to just run into him at a bar or a coffee shop like nothing had happened. But I wasn't expecting to see him at the grocery store. I'd been picking up some things for dinner when I turned the corner and almost bumped right into him. He looked different. He looked like someone who had been carrying the weight of their actions on their shoulders. His eyes were sunken, his face drawn. I guess the guilt was starting to catch up with him. It had been a while, but it still felt like a punch to the gut seeing him. We stood there for a few moments, just staring at each other. Neither of us knew what to say. He was the one who broke the silence, his voice low, almost hesitant. He said he was sorry, not just about the affair, but about everything. About us. About how he had ruined everything. I looked at him, but I didn't feel anything. No anger, no resentment. Just nothing. I was tired. I was tired of carrying around that weight, of feeling like I had to have some big confrontation, some grand gesture of closure. The truth was, I had already let go of what he had done. Not for him. Not because I forgave him. But because I realized that holding on to that bitterness was only hurting me. So, I told him to take care of himself, and I walked away. That was it. It wasn't the dramatic ending I'd imagined. I didn't scream at him or tell him he'd ruined my life. I didn't make him feel as bad as he had made me feel. I didn't need to. I had already taken my revenge in my own way. Walking away, not needing to get anything more from him, was enough. I wasn't going to let him or Sarah dictate my life anymore. And in a way, that felt like my real victory. The revenge wasn't in making them suffer. It was in walking away from them, from the people I had once trusted, and building something for myself. Even if I didn't know exactly what that was yet. But I would figure it out, step by step, because I was done being the victim. The weeks that followed that awkward run-in with Dave were strange. There was a strange kind of quiet settling into my life, and I hated it. I hated how calm it was. It felt like the stillness after a storm, the air thick with the residue of everything that had gone wrong. I couldn't pretend everything was okay. But for the first time in months, I wasn't consumed by anger. I wasn't obsessing over every little detail of the betrayal. I wasn't chasing revenge or answers. I was just living. Or trying to, anyway. I decided that I needed to get out of my head, out of the house, and away from the memories that had been weighing me down. It wasn't about moving on, not really. I wasn't ready for that. But I needed something to fill the empty space. I needed to do something that didn't involve thinking about Sarah, or Dave, or all the broken pieces I was still trying to pick up. So, I started doing small things. Taking walks. Going to the gym again, though it was tough. I'd look in the mirror and feel like a different person, but in a weird way, it felt good to start moving again. I didn't have to think about what had happened. I could just focus on my body, on the present moment. It wasn't a cure, but it was a distraction. And sometimes, that's all you need. I also started reconnecting with a few people. I hadn't been in touch with my old friends much. The ones who hadn't been involved in all the mess. The ones who didn't know the details of what had happened. But when I did reach out, it was like breathing fresh air for the first time in ages. It felt good to talk to someone who didn't look at me with pity in their eyes, who didn't know about the affair or the lies. It was like I could just be me again, not this version of myself that had been broken by betrayal. The first time I went out with them, I didn't talk much about what had happened. I didn't need to. I didn't want to. But when they asked, I told them, briefly. I didn't go into the details, didn't give them the full story. I just told them that things had fallen apart. That Sarah had cheated, and I had to walk away. That I was trying to rebuild. They were supportive, of course. But it felt good to not be the center of attention for once. It felt good to just be. The hardest part, though, was when the kids came back after staying with my parents for a while. I had been dreading it, honestly. I didn't know how I was going to handle them being there all the time, how I would explain what had happened to them, or how much they knew. I didn't want them to see me as this broken man, someone who couldn't even hold his own life together. But when they walked in the door, all of that worry melted away. They didn't care about the mess. They didn't care about the divorce, about Sarah or Dave. They just cared that their dad was there. And in that moment, I realized something. They didn't need a perfect father. They didn't need a dad who had everything figured out. They just needed me to be there. So I tried. I tried harder than I'd ever tried before to put my own pain aside and be present for them. To be the dad they deserved, even if I wasn't sure who I was anymore. But that was okay. Because being there for them, in that moment, was enough. It felt like the first real step in rebuilding. Not my marriage, not my friendship with Dave, but something real. Something solid. My relationship with my kids. And then there were the days when I'd sit alone in the evenings, after the kids had gone to bed, and think about the future. I thought about what came next. I had no idea. I had no idea who I was supposed to be now, or what I was supposed to do. I wasn't ready to start dating again, or even think about getting back out there. But I wasn't the same man I had been when I was with Sarah. That man, the one who trusted so fully, who built a life on the assumption that love and loyalty would always win. He was gone. And maybe that was okay. The man sitting on the couch now, staring at the TV or reading a book in silence, was someone else entirely. Someone who had learned the hard way that life isn't always fair, that people you trust the most will betray you when you least expect it. But someone who, despite all that, was still standing. Still breathing. It wasn't the life I had planned. It wasn't the life I had imagined. But it was my life now. And for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me as much as it used to. I wasn't going to let the betrayal define me anymore. I wasn't going to let it control my every thought, my every action. I was going to figure this out. Slowly. But surely. And I knew, deep down, that I would be okay. I didn't need Sarah or Dave to be okay. I didn't need anyone's approval. I just needed to take it one step at a time. Maybe I didn't have all the answers. Maybe I didn't know what the future held. But I was done being the victim. I was done being defined by what had happened to me. The man I was going to be wasn't going to be some broken shell of the guy I used to be. No. He was going to be stronger, wiser, more cautious, sure. but stronger for it. Because, in the end, I would be the one who had to live with the choices I made. And I was going to choose to move forward, even if it meant doing it alone. Time has this strange way of changing everything, even the things you thought were immovable. In the months that followed the fallout, I started to realize that moving on wasn't about forgetting. It wasn't about erasing the past or pretending like it didn't happen. It was about learning to live with it. Learning to carry those scars and, instead of letting them break you, letting them shape you into someone stronger. Sarah was still in the picture in the sense that we had to communicate about the kids, and there were occasional texts about logistics, about life, about how we'd handle co-parenting. But those texts were brief. There was no emotional connection anymore. No anger. No bitterness. Just business. I didn't need her validation, and I didn't need her apologies. We were two people who used to share a life, but now we were strangers. And in a way, that was okay. It was what I needed. I'd stopped wondering if I would ever get over it. Get over her. Get over the betrayal. Instead, I focused on what I could control. I could control how I responded. I could control how I showed up for my kids. I could control how I treated the people who had stuck by me when everything had crumbled. And the rest. Well, it wasn't up to me. There were moments, of course, when I still felt the weight of it all. When I'd see something on TV that reminded me of Sarah, or when I'd hear about some old mutual friend who had stopped by to see her, or even when the kids would ask why Mommy didn't live with us anymore. It was those moments when the reality would hit me all over again, like a punch to the gut. But I didn't let it control me. Not anymore. I spent a lot of time with the kids. More than I had before. I took them to the park, to the movies, on trips to the zoo. I made memories with them that I knew they'd carry with them, even if they couldn't fully understand everything that had happened. And in the quiet moments, when it was just the three of us at home, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in ages. Maybe it wasn't the life I'd imagined. Maybe it wasn't the life I wanted. But it was the life I had now. And I was learning how to make the best of it. I also started doing things for myself. Things I hadn't done in years. I took up painting again. Something I'd loved before life had gotten so busy. I went on long hikes by myself, enjoying the solitude, the quiet of nature, the feeling of working through my thoughts without the noise of other people's expectations. Slowly, I started to rediscover parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of the marriage, the kids, the everyday grind. And then, one day, I woke up and realized that I was okay. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It wasn't a perfect revelation. It was just the realization that I wasn't drowning anymore. I wasn't a victim of the betrayal. I wasn't living in the shadow of what had happened. I was moving forward, one day at a time. But the hardest part was yet to come. It was when I realized I was ready to let go. Not of the past. That would always be a part of me. But I was ready to let go of the anger. Let go of the need for revenge. Let go of the weight of holding on to everything that had gone wrong. It had been so tempting to hang on to that anger, to let it consume me. But there's only so long you can carry that weight before it starts breaking you down. It wasn't easy. I still had moments when I'd replay everything in my head, when I'd imagine what could have been, what should have been. But I started to let go of those thoughts too. I realized that holding on to all of that was only hurting me. Not Sarah. Not Dave. Just me. It took time, a lot of time. But eventually, I found peace in the idea that I didn't need revenge to feel better. I didn't need them to apologize to make things right. I didn't need anything from them. The only thing I needed was to take back control of my life. To choose to move forward. There were days when I felt strong, when I felt like I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, stronger and more resilient than before. And then there were days when I still felt broken. But that's the thing about healing. It's not linear. Some days, you're on top of the world. And other days, you're just trying to get through the moment without falling apart. But I had learned that those moments didn't define me. What defined me was how I chose to get back up, every time. I didn't expect forgiveness. Not from Sarah, not from Dave. They weren't the ones who needed it. I was the one who needed to forgive myself. Forgive myself for trusting blindly, for allowing my world to revolve around people who didn't deserve it. But forgiveness wasn't about them. It was about freeing myself from the chains I had placed on my own heart. I didn't have all the answers. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to. I was learning to live with the unknown, to embrace the uncertainty of what was next. And that, in itself, felt like a victory. I wasn't the same man I had been, but I was becoming the man I needed to be. Stronger, wiser, more in control. And maybe, just maybe, I was starting to believe that there was more to life than what had been stolen from me. There was still so much left to build. And I was ready for it.